I did not steal your ring. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears as I sat frozen at the dining table, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me with varying degrees of shock and suspicion. My hand trembled around my half-empty wine glass, the crimson liquid rippling like the disbelief coursing through my veins. Then how do you explain it, Dorothy? Melissa, my son's fiancée of 18 months, stood at the head of the table, her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at me. The ring was in my jewelry box this morning. You were the only person who went upstairs to use our bathroom instead of the guest one. And now it's gone. The elegant anniversary dinner, celebrating their first year and a half together, had transformed into a nightmare with a single accusation. The beautiful table setting, the carefully prepared meal, the warm glow of candles, all now backdrop to my public humiliation. I used your bathroom because the downstairs one was occupied. I struggled to keep my voice steady. I didn't go anywhere near your bedroom, let alone your jewelry box. I looked desperately toward my son. Robert sat stunned beside Melissa, his expression a mix of confusion and, it broke my heart to recognize it, doubt. Rob, I pleaded, using his childhood nickname. You know me. You know I would never. Mom, he interrupted, his voice strained. The ring is definitely missing. It was my grandmother's, your mother's ring. Which makes it even more incomprehensible that you think I would steal it. My voice rose despite my efforts to maintain composure. Melissa's mother, Catherine, cleared her throat. Perhaps it just got misplaced. We could all help look. I checked everywhere, Melissa cut in. And it's not just misplaced. It's gone. And the timing. She let the implication hang in the air, poisonous and damning. I became acutely aware of the faces surrounding the table. Melissa's family, her parents, her younger brother Eric, slouched in his chair, avoiding eye contact, her aunt and uncle whispering to each other, 2 cousins looking uncomfortable but intrigued by the drama. None of them knew me well. This was only the 3rd time I'd met most of them. But Robert knew me, my son, whom I'd raised alone since he was 11 when his father died suddenly of a heart attack. The boy I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college. The young man whose broken heart I'd helped mend after his college girlfriend cheated on him. The adult who still called me first with any good news, and he wasn't defending me. Maybe we should call the police, suggested Melissa's father, William, his voice carrying the authority of the corporate executive he was. No, Robert and I exclaimed simultaneously. Let's not overreact, Robert continued. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. The reasonable explanation is that your mother took it, Melissa insisted, tears forming in her eyes. That beautiful antique ring that means so much to both of us. I'd given Robert my mother's ring 6 months ago when he told me he wanted to propose to Melissa. 3 carats of flawless diamond in a platinum Art Deco setting with small sapphires on each side. My mother had worn it for 47 years of marriage. I'd worn it for 22 years until my husband's death. Now it graced Melissa's finger, or it had until today. The weight of the accusation pressed on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. 72 years I'd lived in this world. Never once had anyone questioned my honesty. Never once had I taken anything that wasn't mine. I did not take that ring, I repeated, pushing back my chair and standing. And I won't sit here and be accused of theft in front of an audience. Mom, please. Robert stood too, finally seeming to realize the magnitude of what was happening. Let's all calm down and figure this out rationally. Rationally? I echoed, my voice breaking. Your fiancé just accused me of stealing a family heirloom, and you sat there saying nothing. I didn't say nothing, we're all surprised. Surprised? I gathered my purse from the back of the chair. I'm beyond surprised, Robert. I'm heartbroken. Melissa had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but she didn't retract her accusation. The ring is missing, Dorothy. Those are the facts. And the fact that I've never stolen anything in my life means nothing? I countered, moving toward the door. Where are you going? Robert called after me. Mom, don't leave like this. I turned back one last time, surveying the scene I was leaving. The half-eaten anniversary dinner, the uncomfortable guests, my son's pleading face, Melissa's stubborn certainty. I will not stay where I'm not trusted, I said clearly, ensuring everyone at the table could hear me. And I promise you this, I will never set foot in this house again. Dorothy, you're overreacting, Catherine called after me, but I was already opening the front door. Mom! Robert's voice followed me out onto the porch. Please, we can talk about this. but there was nothing to talk about. The moment my own son had looked at me with doubt in his eyes, something fundamental had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be repaired. I made it to my car before the tears started. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of Robert standing on the porch in the rearview mirror, watching me leave, but making no move to stop me. 3 days later, I was still moving through my house like a ghost, replaying the accusation over and over in my mind. My cell phone showed 17 missed calls from Robert, 5 from Catherine, and even 1 from William. I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. What was there to say? Either they believed I was a thief, or they didn't, and the painful evidence suggested the former. I was watering my neglected houseplants when the landline rang. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was Robert trying another approach, but decades of habit had me picking up the receiver. "Mrs. Winters? This is Thomas Adler from Adler Fine Jewelry on Main Street." I recognized the name immediately. Thomas had sized the ring for Melissa when Robert proposed, and I'd been a customer at his store for years. "Yes, Thomas. What can I do for you?" My voice sounded hollow even to myself. "I'm calling about a rather uncomfortable situation," he continued, his professional tone tinged with concern. "Someone came into the shop this morning, trying to sell a diamond and sapphire ring that matches the description of a family heirloom your son posted about on social media. A distinctive Art Deco piece?" My heart began to race. "Yes, that's my mother's ring. Who brought it in?" There was a pause on the line. "That's why I wanted to speak with you first, Mrs. Winters." The young man identified himself as Eric Parker. Eric Parker, Melissa's 22-year-old brother, the sullen young man who had avoided eye contact throughout that disastrous dinner. "Are you certain?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Absolutely. I've known the Parker family for years, sized Melissa's prom jewelry back when she was in high school. When Eric brought in the ring, I recognized it immediately as the one your son had posted about. I told him I needed to authenticate it and asked him to leave it with me. My mind raced through the implications. Melissa's brother had the ring, had tried to sell it, the very ring I'd been accused of stealing. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "Not yet. The young man left in quite a hurry when I asked questions about provenance, but I have the ring secured in my safe. I thought you should know first, given the delicate family situation." Delicate. What a polite word for the devastating accusation that had been leveled against me. "Thank you, Thomas," I said, a plan already forming in my mind. "Could you do me a favor? Don't call anyone else yet. Not Robert, not the police. I'll be at your store in 30 minutes. After hanging up, I went to my bedroom and changed from the shapeless loungewear I'd been wearing for 3 days into a crisp blue dress and pearl earrings. I applied lipstick with a steady hand and brushed my silver hair until it shone. If I was going to reclaim my dignity, I would do it looking like the woman who had earned the respect of her community over 7 decades of honest living, not as the broken-hearted mother who had been crying into her tea for 3 days. As I drove to Adler Fine Jewelry, I sent identical text messages to both Robert and Melissa. "Meet me at Adler Fine Jewelry on Main Street in 30 minutes. Come alone. It's about the ring." My hands no longer shook as I put the car in drive. Anger had replaced hurt. Determination had overcome shock. Someone had sought to destroy my reputation and damage the most precious relationship in my life, the one with my only child. That someone was about to learn that Dorothy Winters was not a woman to be underestimated or falsely accused. Thomas Adler's jewelry store was a local institution, 3 generations of craftsmanship housed in a Victorian building with gleaming display cases and soft classical music. Thomas himself greeted me at the door, his kind eyes registering the strain of the past 3 days on my face. "Mrs. Winters, I'm so glad you came." He locked the door behind me and flipped the sign to closed, ensuring our privacy. "The ring is in my office safe. Thank you for calling me," I said, following him to the back room. "And thank you for your discretion." Thomas's office was a testament to old-world professionalism, leather-bound appraisal books, antique scales, and photographs of his family through generations of jewelers. He gestured for me to take a seat in a leather chair as he opened a wall safe. "Here it is," he said, placing a small velvet box on the desk between us. "Would you like to confirm it's the same piece?" I nodded, though verification was unnecessary. As Thomas opened the box, I recognized my mother's ring immediately. The diamond caught the light, throwing prismatic reflections across the office, just as it had done when my father proposed in 1946, when my husband placed it on my finger in 1968, and when I passed it to Robert for Melissa last year. That's it, I confirmed, resisting the urge to touch it. Did Eric say anything when he brought it in? Any explanation for how it came into his possession? He claimed it was a family piece he'd inherited, Thomas replied, his disapproval evident. When I mentioned knowing his family and recognizing the ring from your son's social media post, he became quite agitated, claimed there must be a misunderstanding, but left the ring behind in his haste to leave. A soft chime from my phone indicated a message. Robert, on my way. Is everything okay? I didn't respond. Better for him to wonder, to feel a fraction of the anxiety I'd experienced these past days. They'll be here shortly, I told Thomas. Would it be possible to arrange things so that they don't see me immediately when they arrive? Thomas understood instantly. The consultation room has a two-way mirror. We use it when clients want to observe custom work without hovering over our artisans. You could wait there, see them when they arrive. Perfect. Within 10 minutes, I was seated in the small observation room. Through the one-way glass, I could see Thomas's office clearly, including the velvet box containing the ring now positioned prominently on his desk. I didn't have to wait long. The store's bell chimed as Robert arrived first, his face drawn with concern. Thomas greeted him and escorted him to the office. Less than 2 minutes later, Melissa entered, looking equally apprehensive. Neither seemed surprised to see the other, suggesting they'd communicated en route. From my hidden vantage point, I watched as Thomas seated them across from his desk, the ring box between them. Melissa's eyes fixed on it immediately. "Is that?" she began, reaching toward the box. "Mrs. Parker, Mr. Winters," Thomas interrupted formally. "Before we proceed, I want to be clear about the situation. This ring was brought into my store this morning by someone attempting to sell it." "Who?" Robert demanded, leaning forward. "Who had my grandmother's ring?" Thomas glanced toward the two-way mirror, my cue to enter. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked into the office with all the dignity I could muster. "Your fiancé's brother," I said clearly, watching their heads snap toward me in shock. "Eric brought it here this morning, trying to sell my mother's ring. The same ring I was accused of stealing." The color drained from Melissa's face. That's impossible. Eric wouldn't." "Thomas recognized him immediately," I continued, moving to stand beside the jeweler's desk, just as he recognized the ring from Robert's social media post about its disappearance. Robert looked stunned, his gaze darting between me, Thomas, and the ring. "You're certain it was Eric?" "I've known the Parker family for 20 years, Thomas confirmed. "It was definitely Eric Parker." Melissa shook her head vehemently. "There must be some mistake. Eric has been having financial problems, but he wouldn't steal from me." "The evidence suggests otherwise," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Robert stood suddenly. "Mom, I don't know what to say. If this is true—" "If?" I interrupted, the word sharp as a blade. "The ring is here, Robert. Your future brother-in-law tried to sell it hours after I was publicly accused of stealing it. There is no if about it." Melissa's composure crumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry. I jumped to conclusions. I was so upset about the ring, and when it disappeared right after you'd been upstairs. You accused me of theft," I finished for her, "in front of your entire family, without a shred of evidence beyond circumstantial timing." "I was wrong," she whispered. "Terribly wrong." "Yes, you were." I turned to Robert, whose face reflected shame and regret. "And you let her. You sat there while your mother was called a thief, and you said nothing in my defense." "Mom, I was shocked. I didn't know what to think." His voice cracked with emotion. "I never really believed you would take it. I was just confused by the timing." "That's somehow worse," I observed quietly. "If you'd actually believed I was capable of theft, that would be hurtful enough, but knowing in your heart I wasn't, and still failing to defend me? That's cowardice, Robert." He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "You're right. I have no excuse." Thomas cleared his throat. "Mrs. Winters, I need to ask, would you like me to contact the police? Attempted sale of stolen property is a criminal offense." The question hung in the air. Reporting Eric would create a permanent rift with Melissa's family. Not reporting him would let a thief escape consequences. "Yes," I said finally. "Call the police." "Dorothy, please," Melissa begged. "Eric has been struggling. He made a terrible mistake." "As did you," I cut her off. "Actions have consequences, Melissa. Your brother stole a family heirloom and tried to sell it. My reputation was damaged. My relationship with my son was damaged. Those aren't small things to be swept under the rug with an apology. While Thomas stepped out to make the call, Robert approached me cautiously. Mom, I can't tell you how sorry I am. What can I do to make this right? I studied my son's face, the boy I'd raised to be honorable and brave, who had failed on both counts when it mattered. I still loved him, of course. That would never change. But something fundamental had shifted between us. I don't know if this can be made right, I answered honestly. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. Please, Melissa joined him, her voice trembling. Tell us what we can do. Anything. I looked between them, the young couple who had wounded me so deeply, now desperate for absolution. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 days ago, they had been my accusers. Now they sought my forgiveness. But forgiveness, I was discovering, wasn't a simple thing to grant when the wound was still so fresh. The police will need statements from both of you, I said, instead of answering their plea. And I'll need time. Time to process what happened and decide what our relationship looks like going forward. As Thomas returned to inform us that officers were on their way, I picked up the velvet box containing my mother's ring, the heirloom that had become the center of so much pain. This ring has witnessed 3 generations of love and commitment, I said, closing the box with a decisive snap. It deserves better than to be a source of suspicion and betrayal. I placed it in Robert's hand, our eyes meeting in a moment of profound sadness and understanding. Figure out what that means, I told him, while I figure out what forgiveness means to me. The police arrived 15 minutes later, Officer Davis and his younger partner, Officer Chen. I knew Davis from community events. His daughter had been in Robert's high school class. The recognition in his eyes when he saw me sitting in Thomas's office spoke volumes. Mrs. Winters, he greeted me with respectful concern. I understand there's been a situation involving stolen property. Thomas explained the circumstances professionally. The ring's disappearance, the social media post, Eric Parker's attempt to sell it, and his hasty departure when questioned. We have the ring secured, Thomas concluded, indicating the velvet box now sitting in an evidence bag, and Mrs. Winters has confirmed it's the family heirloom in question. Davis turned to me. You were accused of taking this item? The direct question made me flinch despite my composure. Yes, at a family dinner 3 days ago. His expression darkened slightly. He'd known me for 20 years, seen me chaperoning school events, volunteering at the community center, heading the library fundraising committee. The idea that anyone would accuse me of theft clearly disturbed him. And Mr. Parker? Do you know his whereabouts? He asked, turning to Melissa. She looked miserable, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. He lives with our parents, but he might be at work. He's a barback at the Anchor downtown. Officer Chen made a note and stepped outside, presumably to radio this information. We'll need statements from everyone, Davis explained. Mrs. Winters, as the reporting party. Mr. Adler, as the recipient of the stolen property. And both of you, he looked at Robert and Melissa, as the legal owners of the ring and family members of the suspect. The next hour passed in a formal blur, providing details, signing statements, answering questions. Through it all, I maintained a dignified calm, though internally, I fluctuated between vindication and lingering hurt. We'll pick up Eric Parker for questioning, Davis assured us as they prepared to leave. Given the evidence and witness statements, I anticipate charges will be filed for theft and attempted sale of stolen property. Thank you, officer, I said, rising to shake his hand. As the police departed with the evidence bag containing the ring, an uncomfortable silence fell over Thomas's office. The jeweler excused himself tactfully, leaving me alone with Robert and Melissa. Mom, Robert began hesitantly, can we talk? Maybe go somewhere for coffee? The thought of sitting across from them in a public place, making small talk while pretending the wound wasn't still raw, exhausted me. Not today, I replied. I need some time alone. But we need to clear the air, Melissa insisted, her voice cracking. I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I believe you're sorry, Melissa, but that doesn't undo what happened. I gathered my purse, suddenly desperate for the sanctuary of my own home. You accused me of a crime in front of your entire family. You damaged my reputation and my relationship with my son. That can't be erased with a simple apology. What can we do? Robert asked, desperation edging his voice. Tell us what you need from us to make this right. I paused at the door, considering his question seriously. What did I need? What would heal this breach of trust? Space, I answered finally. And time to process everything. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk. I left them standing in Thomas's office, expressions crestfallen. Part of me, the mother who had spent decades putting my son's needs before my own, felt guilty for causing Robert pain. But a newer, still emerging part of me recognized the necessity of protecting my own heart and dignity. The drive home was strangely peaceful. The revelation of Eric's guilt had lifted the shadow of suspicion, but it had also clarified something important. My relationship with Robert had been fundamentally unbalanced for years. I had given endlessly. He had taken my support for granted. When had I last done something solely for myself? When had I prioritized my own happiness over facilitating his? As I entered my house, a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom I'd owned since Robert left for college, I noticed the blinking light on my answering machine. 6 new messages. I pressed play, unsurprised to hear Catherine Parker's voice first. "Dorothy, it's Catherine. The police just took Eric from our house. William and I are devastated. There must be some misunderstanding. Please call us back so we can sort this out as a family." Beep. "Dorothy, it's Catherine again. Eric has confessed to taking the ring. I don't know what to say, except we're deeply sorry for what happened at the dinner. Please call us." The remaining messages were variations on the same theme. Apologies, pleas for leniency, suggestions that we handle this privately as a family. The final message was from William, his executive's voice uncharacteristically humble. "Dorothy, William Parker here. I want to personally apologize for the terrible accusation made against you in our presence. We should have spoken up. Eric has admitted everything to the police, and we will ensure he makes full restitution. Please consider that he's a young man who made a terrible mistake." I deleted all the messages without responding. The Parker family's sudden concern felt hollow, motivated more by damage control than genuine remorse. They'd been silent witnesses to my humiliation. Their belated apologies changed nothing. My cell phone buzzed with another text from Robert. "Please talk to us. We're so sorry. Tell us how to fix this." I set the phone aside without replying and walked to my home office. Opening the bottom drawer of my desk, I removed a blue folder labeled Travel Dreams. Inside were brochures, printouts, and a detailed itinerary for a Mediterranean cruise: Athens, Santorini, Sicily, Barcelona, Provence. A trip I'd spent 3 years planning and saving for. Originally, I'd intended it as a wedding gift for Robert and Melissa, a luxurious honeymoon to start their marriage with adventure and beauty. I'd nearly finished paying for it, had already put down the substantial non-refundable deposit. I spread the materials across my desk, running my fingers over glossy images of whitewashed villages clinging to cliffs, ancient ruins bathed in golden light, azure waters lapping at picturesque harbors. A sudden thought struck me with unexpected clarity. Why shouldn't I take this cruise myself? Why was I always the one giving, sacrificing, planning for others' happiness? I'd raised my son alone after becoming a widow at 43. I'd worked hard, lived frugally, put him through college without debt. I'd been mother and father, provider and nurturer, disciplinarian and confidant. And when accused of theft, he hadn't immediately rejected the very possibility. Hadn't stood up and said, "My mother would never." My gaze fell on a photograph of myself at 25, young, smiling, full of dreams, on my honeymoon in Cape Cod, the furthest I'd ever traveled. My husband had promised we'd see Europe together someday, but cancer had taken him before someday arrived. I picked up my phone and dialed the travel agency's number, a decision crystallizing with each ring. "Horizon Travel, this is Amanda speaking." "Hello, Amanda. This is Dorothy Winters. I have a Mediterranean cruise booked for July. Reservation number W57923. I'd like to make a change to the booking." "Of course, Mrs. Winters. What change would you like to make?" I took a deep breath, feeling a surprising sense of liberation. "I'd like to change the names on the reservation. Instead of Robert and Melissa Winters, I'd like the booking to be for just one person, myself." Amanda's voice betrayed only slight surprise at my request. "Certainly, Mrs. Winters. Let me access your reservation. Yes, I see it here. A 14-day Mediterranean cruise, deluxe veranda stateroom for 2. You'd like to change this to a single occupancy for yourself?" "That's correct." My certainty grew with each passing second. "Is there an additional fee for making this change?" Actually, changing from double to single occupancy usually results in a supplemental charge, but I heard keyboard clicks as she examined the details. Since you're within the modification period and the cruise isn't for another 3 months, we can adjust this without penalty. The cruise line might offer a partial refund since single occupancy costs less than double, though the difference won't be substantial with this premium package. That's fine, I said, a strange lightness filling my chest. Please process the change. 10 minutes later, it was done. The Mediterranean cruise, the one I'd scrimped and saved for, planning to give Robert and Melissa the honeymoon I'd never had with my husband, was now mine. My trip, my adventure. As I hung up, I felt a momentary pang of guilt. Was I being petty, vindictive, using the cruise as punishment for their betrayal? No, I decided. This wasn't about punishment. It was about recognizing finally that I deserved to prioritize my own happiness, that after a lifetime of putting others first, it was my turn. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Robert standing on my porch, alone, his expression a mixture of anxiety and determination. For a moment, I considered not answering, but avoiding confrontation had never been my style. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he began, "I know you said you needed space, but I couldn't leave things like that. I need you to understand how sorry I am." "I believe you're sorry, Robert." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "That doesn't change what happened. Please let me come in. Just for a few minutes." I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered cautiously, as if treading on unfamiliar ground rather than the home he'd grown up in. We moved to the living room, sitting in our usual places, me in my reading chair by the window, him on the sofa adjacent. "The police are pressing charges," he said, breaking the awkward silence. "Eric confessed everything. Apparently he has a gambling problem, needed cash quickly. When he saw Melissa's ring on the dresser that morning, it was opportunistic." "I see." My response was neutral, non-committal. "Melissa's parents want to handle it privately. They're pushing for us to drop charges, say it's a family matter." His mouth twisted wryly. "Ironic, considering they didn't view the false accusation against you as something to handle privately." Despite everything, I felt a small spark of pride at his perception. "And what do you think should happen?" "It's not up to me," he replied. "Eric committed a crime. He's an adult. The justice system should proceed accordingly." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "But Mom, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I failed you fundamentally, and I don't know how to make it right." The raw honesty in his voice pierced through some of my defenses. This was my son, my only child, the boy who'd cried in my arms after his father's funeral, the teenager who'd brought me wildflowers on Mother's Day, the young man who'd worked 3 jobs to buy me a proper headstone for my husband's grave when the insurance money ran out. "Why didn't you defend me immediately?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for days. "When she accused me, why wasn't your first response to say it was impossible?" Robert's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've asked myself the same question 100 times since that night." He took a shaky breath. "The truth is, I was caught so off guard that I froze. It was so absurd, so completely out of nowhere, that my brain couldn't process it fast enough." "That's an explanation, not an excuse," I observed. "I know." He nodded, accepting the rebuke. "And there's more to it, something I'm not proud of." He looked away, his profile so like his father's that my heart constricted. "I've spent my whole adult life trying not to disappoint you. You sacrificed everything for me after Dad died. You worked those awful double shifts to put me through college. You never remarried, never even dated, because you were so focused on giving me a stable home." I frowned, uncertain where this was leading. "I never viewed any of that as sacrifice, Robert. You were my child. I loved you. I know, and that made it worse. Your love was so unconditional, so all-encompassing, that I grew up feeling I could never possibly repay it." His voice thickened. "So when Melissa made that accusation, some twisted part of me almost wanted it to be true." The admission stunned me. "You wanted to believe I stole the ring?" "No. Not consciously. Never consciously." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But if you had taken it, if you had done something wrong for once, maybe I wouldn't feel so eternally indebted to your perfection. Maybe I could finally feel like we were on equal footing." The revelation hung between us, painful in its honesty. I'd never considered that my devotion might have become a burden to him. that my sacrifice might have created an imbalance neither of us fully recognized until now. I see, I said finally, processing this new perspective. It was only for a split second, he hurried to add. Then my rational mind kicked in, and I knew you would never do such a thing. But that moment of almost relief, it paralyzed me. By the time I gathered myself to defend you properly, you were already leaving. I stood, moving to the window to collect my thoughts. Outside, spring was asserting itself, daffodils pushing through soil, buds forming on the old oak tree, nature's perpetual cycle of renewal. Thank you for your honesty, I said eventually. It helps me understand. Does it help you forgive? Hope edged his voice. I turned back to him, choosing my words carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Robert. It's a process, and I'm still in the middle of it. He nodded, accepting this. Melissa wants to return the ring. She says she doesn't feel worthy of wearing it anymore. That's between you and her. The ring is yours now, to do with as you see fit. And us? He asked quietly. What about our relationship? I returned to my chair, regarding my son with clear eyes. That's also in process. I love you, Robert. That hasn't changed and won't ever change. But how we relate to each other, that needs recalibration. What does that mean exactly? It means, I said, finding strength in my newly made decision, that I've spent my entire adult life prioritizing your happiness above my own. And it's time that changed. His expression shifted to confusion. Mom, I don't expect you to... I know you don't expect it. That's not the issue. I created this dynamic between us, and now I'm changing it. I crossed to my desk and retrieved the cruise brochure, handing it to him. He looked down at it, recognition dawning. The Mediterranean cruise? The one you've been saving for? Yes. I've been planning it for 3 years. It was going to be my wedding gift to you and Melissa. Your honeymoon. Understanding bloomed in his eyes, followed quickly by dismay. Was going to be? I've changed the reservation, I confirmed. The cruise is now for one person. Me. Robert stared at me, shock evident in his expression. You're taking the cruise yourself? But Mom, you've been saving for this for years. You always said it was for a special occasion. And what could be more special than finally doing something I've dreamed of my entire life? I reclaimed the brochure from his hands. I'm 68 years old, Robert. I've never seen the Mediterranean. Your father and I always talked about going someday, but someday never came for him. I don't know what to say, he admitted, appearing genuinely stunned. I had no idea you were planning this as our honeymoon gift. That was the point. It was meant to be a surprise. I returned the brochure to my desk, but circumstances change, priorities shift, and I've realized that it's time I lived for myself, not just for you. He sat silently, absorbing this new reality. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued but accepting. When do you leave? July 5th, Athens to Barcelona. Will you be safe traveling alone? The question might have irritated me once, the implication that I needed protection or supervision. Now I recognized it as genuine concern, if somewhat misplaced. I'll be on a luxury cruise ship with 2,000 other passengers and a crew of 800, I reminded him. I think I'll manage. The following week passed in a strange limbo. News of Eric's arrest had spread through our small community, and with it, the story of my false accusation. I received no fewer than 14 calls from concerned friends who were transparently fishing for gossip details. I answered none of them. I did, however, attend my regular Tuesday bridge game at the community center. The moment I walked in, conversation ceased abruptly, a sure sign I'd been the topic of discussion. Dorothy! Marion Evans, my bridge partner of 15 years, hurried over. We weren't sure you'd come today. And miss taking your money? I replied lightly, setting down my purse. I wouldn't dream of it. The artificial normalcy was almost comical. 4 women in their 60s and 70s pretending that one of them hadn't been recently accused of theft by her future daughter-in-law, only to be vindicated when the real culprit was arrested. The elephant in the room grew so large it practically trumped our card play. Finally, during the refreshment break, Judith Peterson, never known for her tact, broached the subject. So, Dorothy, is it true that Melissa Parker's brother is facing criminal charges for stealing your mother's ring? The same ring she accused you of taking? The directness of the question actually came as a relief after an hour of meaningful glances and awkward pauses. Yes, Judith, that's correct. I stirred my tea calmly. Eric Parker stole the ring from his sister's jewelry box and attempted to sell it at Adler Fine Jewelry. Thomas recognized it immediately and contacted me. How dreadful for you, Marion sympathized, patting my hand. To be accused like that in front of everyone. And by family, no less. I can't imagine Robert didn't defend you on the spot, Judith continued, her eyes bright with curiosity. He's always been such a devoted son. The implicit question hung in the air. Had my son stood by me, or had he failed? I chose not to satisfy their curiosity on that point. It was an unfortunate situation all around, I said diplomatically, but the truth has come to light, which is what matters. Will there be a wedding after all this? Asked Elaine Bryant, the fourth member of our bridge quartet. I can't imagine family gatherings won't be awkward, to say the least. That's for Robert and Melissa to decide, I replied, signaling an end to the topic. Now shall we finish our game? I believe Marion and I were ahead by 30 points. I maintained this composed facade throughout the afternoon, but by the time I returned home, emotional exhaustion had set in. The constant need to appear unaffected was taking its toll. I was halfway through preparing a solitary dinner when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Melissa standing alone on my porch, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, but that would only postpone the inevitable. When I opened the door, the confident young woman who had pointed an accusatory finger at me was nowhere in evidence. Instead, Melissa looked small, her usual perfect appearance noticeably subdued. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans rather than her typical designer attire. "Dorothy," she began tentatively, "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to talk to you, alone, without Robert." Curiosity won out over reluctance. "Come in." I led her to the living room, but didn't offer refreshments. This wasn't a social call, and we both knew it. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, perching on the edge of the sofa. "I wouldn't blame you if you'd slammed the door in my face." "I considered it," I admitted, settling into my chair. "What did you want to discuss that couldn't be said with Robert present?" Melissa took a deep breath. "I wanted to explain why I accused you, not to excuse it. There's no excuse, but so you might understand." "Go on." "The ring disappeared the morning after my parents' anniversary dinner," she began. "I'd taken it off before bed because it was catching on my cashmere sweater. When I went to put it on again the next morning, it was gone." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. My first thought was panic, that I'd somehow lost this irreplaceable family heirloom. My second thought was fear. Fear of telling Robert, fear of disappointing him and you. She twisted her hands anxiously. "Then I remembered you'd been upstairs using our bathroom the night before. And this awful idea took root. The idea that I'd stolen my own mother's ring," I supplied, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes." She looked down, shame evident in her posture. "And once the thought was there, my mind started creating this narrative, that maybe you resented me wearing it, that maybe you thought I wasn't worthy of it, that maybe you wanted to give it to someone else. Someone like Rebecca?" I asked, referencing Robert's college girlfriend, his first serious relationship. Melissa's head snapped up, surprise in her eyes. "How did you know?" "Janet mentioned your insecurities about being the second serious relationship in Robert's life, about feeling like you were being compared to her." "It's true," she admitted. "I've always felt like I'm living in her shadow. Robert doesn't talk about her much, but his friends do. The perfect college sweetheart who broke his heart. Sometimes I catch you looking at me like you're measuring me against her." The observation startled me with its accuracy. Had I been doing that, even unconsciously? "Rebecca was Robert's past," I said carefully. "You're his present and future. If I've ever seemed to be comparing, it wasn't intentional." "Maybe not consciously," she acknowledged, "but it was there. And when the ring disappeared, all those insecurities exploded into this horrible accusation." Tears welled in her eyes. "I will regret that moment for the rest of my life, Dorothy. The look on your face when I accused you, I'll never forget it." Her raw honesty disarmed me somewhat. This wasn't the practiced apology of someone seeking quick forgiveness. This was genuine remorse. "What about Eric?" I asked. "Did you suspect him at all?" She shook her head miserably. "No, Eric's been struggling. Gambling debts, trouble holding jobs, but theft from family? I never imagined he'd go that far." She wiped away a tear. "My parents are devastated. They've arranged for him to enter a treatment program as part of his plea deal." "I see." "Dorothy, Melissa continued, her voice trembling. I know an apology isn't enough, but I am truly, deeply sorry, not just for the accusation, but for not having the courage to come directly to you when the ring went missing, for letting my insecurities poison my judgment, for humiliating you in front of everyone. I studied her face, searching for artifice and finding none. The young woman before me was genuinely contrite, genuinely suffering. Thank you for your honesty, I said finally. It can't undo what happened, but it helps me understand. Relief flickered across her features, though she remained cautious. Robert told me about the cruise, that you were planning it as our honeymoon gift. Yes, and now you're taking it yourself. Yes, I confirmed again. She nodded slowly. You deserve it. After everything, especially this, you deserve to do something wonderful for yourself. She hesitated, then added, Robert's devastated, though. Not about losing the cruise, but about losing your trust. He loves you so much, Dorothy. I know he does, I acknowledged, but love without respect isn't enough. When he failed to defend me immediately, he showed that his respect for me wasn't as instinctive as it should have been. He's trying to figure out how to earn that back, she said softly. We both are. I rose, signaling that our conversation was nearing its end. Rebuilding trust takes time, Melissa. There are no shortcuts. She stood as well, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a small velvet pouch. I brought this for you. The police released it back to us after Eric's confession. She extended her hand, and I saw my mother's ring resting in her palm. Robert and I both agree. It should be with you now. Neither of us feels right about me wearing it anymore. I looked at the ring, the diamond catching light, just as it had done throughout my childhood as it graced my mother's finger. So much history, so much meaning, now tainted by suspicion and accusation. Keep it, I said, surprising us both. It was given to you for a reason. Don't let one terrible mistake erase that intention. Are you sure? Doubt clouded her expression. After everything, the ring is part of our family history, the good and the bad. Running from that history solves nothing. I closed her fingers gently around the ring. Whether you wear it or not is your choice, but the gift stands. As I showed Melissa to the door, I realized something had shifted inside me. Her visit hadn't erased the hurt, but it had begun the slow process of healing. Not for her sake, or even for Robert's, but for my own peace of mind. Dorothy, she said, pausing on the porch, thank you for listening, for not slamming the door in my face. I've never been one for slamming doors, I replied, but I've discovered I am quite good at booking cruises. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I hope you have a wonderful time. You've certainly earned it. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt the weight of resentment lifting slightly from my shoulders. Not gone entirely, that would take time, but lighter, manageable. The Mediterranean awaited, with or without forgiveness fully realized, and I intended to meet it on my own terms. As May turned to June, my cruise preparations began in earnest. I created detailed packing lists, researched shore excursions, and purchased practical items like a money belt, travel adapter, and comfortable walking shoes. Each step further cemented the reality of my decision. I was actually doing this. I, Dorothy Winters, was embarking on a solo adventure at 68. You'll need more than sensible shoes, declared my friend Marion during a shopping expedition to the mall. You need a completely new wardrobe, something that says sophisticated world traveler, not suburban grandmother. I am a suburban grandmother, I protested as she steered me toward a boutique I'd normally walk past. Not on this trip, you're not, she insisted. You're a woman of mystery, elegant, independent, with stories in your eyes that make men wonder. I laughed at her theatrical description, but allowed myself to be guided into the store. 3 hours later, I emerged with sundresses in colors I'd never worn, flowing linen pants, silky blouses, and even a swimsuit that Marion swore took 10 years off. I feel ridiculous, I confessed as we collapsed into chairs at the food court. Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Marion studied me over her iced tea. Dorothy, do you remember what you wore to Sarah's wedding last year? That navy dress with the jacket, I replied. What about it? Navy, with a matching jacket. In June, she shook her head. You've been dressing like you're in mourning for 20 years. That's not true, I protested, though a quick mental inventory of my wardrobe revealed an alarming predominance of navy, black, and beige. It is true. Ever since James died, you've been living half a life, dressing the part of the perpetual widow. She reached across the table to pat my hand. This trip is your chance to rediscover the Dorothy who existed before loss and sacrifice became your defining characteristics. Her words struck deeper than she knew. Had I truly been trapped in perpetual mourning, not just for James, but for the life we'd planned together, the adventures we'd never taken, the experiences postponed for a someday that never arrived? Maybe you're right, I conceded, looking down at the shopping bags with new appreciation. Maybe it's time for a change. Hallelujah! Marion raised her plastic cup in a toast. Now, about your hair. 2 weeks before departure, Robert invited me to dinner. Just the two of us at Antonio's, the Italian restaurant that had been our special place for mother-son celebrations since his high school graduation. I accepted, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. He was already waiting when I arrived, standing respectfully as the hostess led me to our table. "You look wonderful, Mom," he said, genuine appreciation in his eyes as he took in my new hairstyle. Softened layers that Marion's stylist had insisted brought out my cheekbones, and a turquoise blouse that would never have made it into my closet a month ago. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment without deflection, another new habit I was cultivating. "It's good to see you, Robert." The initial awkwardness dissipated as we fell into familiar patterns, discussing books we'd read, local news, his work as an architectural engineer. We carefully avoided mention of Melissa or the ring incident until the main course arrived. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said suddenly, setting down his fork, "to understand why I reacted, or didn't react, the way I did that night." This revelation surprised me. Robert had always dismissed therapy as paying strangers to state the obvious. "What have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That I've been defining myself primarily as Dorothy's son for my entire adult life." He smiled ruefully. "My identity has been so wrapped up in being the child you sacrificed everything for that I never developed a complete sense of self separate from your expectations." "I never meant to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "You never pressured me overtly, but the weight of your sacrifices created its own pressure. I've spent my life trying to be worthy of everything you gave up for me." I considered this perspective, so similar to what he'd shared in our previous conversation, yet now framed with greater insight. "And Melissa?" I prompted. "How is she doing?" "She's also in therapy. Separately." He shifted uncomfortably. "We've postponed the wedding." This was news. "For how long?" "Indefinitely. We both realized we have individual work to do before we're ready for marriage." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. Her accusation and my failure to defend you immediately. They revealed cracks in our foundation that we can't ignore. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Despite everything, I didn't wish unhappiness for either of them." "Don't be. It's the right decision." He took a sip of his wine. "Actually, that's part of why I wanted to have dinner tonight. To thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For showing me what it looks like to choose yourself." He gestured to my new appearance. "Look at you, preparing for this adventure, making changes, stepping outside your comfort zone, all because you finally decided to prioritize your own happiness." I hadn't considered my decisions in quite that light, but he wasn't wrong. "It's been liberating," I acknowledged. "That's exactly it. And watching you has helped me realize I need to figure out who Robert Winters is when he's not performing the role of perfect son or devoted fiancé." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. So, in a strange way, that terrible night set both of us free. We finished dinner on a lighter note, sharing memories of happier times and making tentative plans for after my return from the cruise. As Robert walked me to my car, he hesitated, then pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "A bon voyage gift," he explained. "Don't open it until you're on the ship." I accepted it with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." "Mom," he said as I unlocked my car door, "I know things aren't fully healed between us yet, but I want you to know how much I admire your strength, your resilience, your capacity to begin again, even after betrayal." The sincerity in his voice touched me. "I learned it from my mother," I told him, "and I hope I passed it on to you." "You did," he assured me, "more than you know." As I drove home, I reflected on our conversation with cautious optimism. The breach between us was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless, not through grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but through the more sustainable path of mutual growth and honest communication. The final days before departure passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. I arranged for Marion to water my plants, put my mail on hold, and confirmed my airport shuttle reservation. The night before leaving, I stood in my bedroom surrounded by an open suitcase and neatly folded piles of new clothes, double-checking my packing list. My gaze fell on the framed photograph on my bedside table. James and me on our wedding day, young and glowing with hope for the future we'd planned together. A future that had ended abruptly with his diagnosis at 42 and death at 45. "I'm finally going to see the Mediterranean," I told his image softly. "Not quite the way we planned, but I'm going." I could almost hear his response, his warm laugh, his voice saying, "Better late than never, Dot." He'd been the only one who ever called me that. Carefully, I wrapped the photograph in a scarf and tucked it into my suitcase. Perhaps it was sentimental, bringing my late husband's picture on a journey meant to mark my independence. But true independence, I was learning, didn't mean severing connections to the past. It meant carrying them forward on my own terms. As I zipped the suitcase closed, a sense of peaceful anticipation settled over me. Tomorrow I would board a plane to Athens, beginning an adventure decades in the making. Not as Robert's mother, not as James's widow, but simply as Dorothy Winters, a woman rediscovering herself, one step at a time. The Mediterranean was waiting, and for once, so was I. The Athens airport buzzed with a symphony of languages as I followed the stream of arrivals toward the exit, pulling my wheeled suitcase behind me. Despite almost 24 hours of travel, from our regional airport to Chicago, Chicago to London, London to Athens, I felt surprisingly alert, buoyed by the knowledge that I had actually done it. I had crossed an ocean on my own. Outside the terminal, Mediterranean sunshine greeted me with an intensity I'd never experienced in our temperate Midwestern climate. The shuttle driver holding a sign with Winter's Celestial Cruises directed me to an air-conditioned van where 4 other passengers already waited. "First time in Greece?" asked a silver-haired woman about my age as I settled into the seat beside her. "First time outside the United States," I admitted, "unless you count Canada." "Oh, my dear, you're in for a treat." She introduced herself as Margaret, a retired high school principal from Australia. Nothing quite compares to seeing the Acropolis for the first time. As the shuttle navigated through Athens traffic, Margaret pointed out landmarks and offered travel tips with the expertise of a seasoned globetrotter. I learned she was a widow of 15 years who had made solo travel her retirement project. "I've done 37 countries so far," she told me proudly. "Started the year after Harold died. Figured I could either sit at home missing him or I could see the world for both of us." Her words resonated deeply. Wasn't that exactly what I was doing? Seeing the Mediterranean not just for myself, but for James too? The shuttle finally arrived at Piraeus Port, where the Celestial Odyssey awaited, a gleaming white vessel rising majestically above the harbor. As I stepped out into the heat, Margaret gave my arm a friendly squeeze. "Find me on board," she said. "Deck 9, Sunrise Yoga." We solo travelers should stick together. The embarkation process passed in a blur of boarding documents, security checks, and cabin directions. By late afternoon, I was settled in my veranda stateroom, unpacking methodically as announcements about safety drills and welcome receptions echoed through the corridors. When I reached the bottom of my suitcase, I found Robert's wrapped package, small, rectangular, carefully sealed with tape. Following his instructions, I unwrapped it here, aboard the ship. Inside was a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed in gold on the cover. A note was tucked into the first page. "Mom, for recording new memories as beautiful as you deserve. May this journey be the first of many. All my love, Robert." I ran my fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of his gift. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son, still capable of gestures that reached my heart. The journal was both acknowledgement and encouragement, recognition of my need for independence and support for the path I'd chosen. The mandatory safety drill interrupted my reflection. I joined fellow passengers at our designated muster station, listening to instructions about life jackets and evacuation procedures. Looking around at the diverse crowd, families with excited children, honeymooning couples, groups of friends, and quite a few solo travelers like myself, I felt a surprising sense of belonging. We were all embarking on this adventure together, regardless of what had brought us here. After the drill, I returned to my cabin to prepare for the evening's welcome reception. Standing before the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection with critical eyes. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the Dorothy Winters, who had been publicly accused of theft 3 months ago. My newly styled hair framed a face touched with subtle makeup, techniques learned during a makeover Marion had insisted on as a pre-trip gift. The emerald green cocktail dress, another purchase from our shopping expedition, complemented my eyes and fell gracefully over my figure. Not bad for 68, I told my reflection, practicing the art of self-compliment that still felt foreign to my lips. The ship's horn sounded as I made my way to the Grand Lounge for the captain's welcome reception. Through panoramic windows, I watched Athens recede as we sailed from port, the fading sunlight casting a golden glow over the ancient city. A glass of champagne appeared in my hand, offered by a smiling steward. "To new beginnings," I whispered, raising the glass in a private toast. "New beginnings indeed," came a cheerful voice beside me. I turned to find Margaret, resplendent in a flowing tunic over silk pants. "You clean up nicely, Dorothy from the Midwest." "As do you," I replied, pleased to see a familiar face. "Come along." She linked her arm through mine. "Let me introduce you to the usual suspects. There's a core group of us solo travelers who find each other on every cruise." Before I could respond, she was guiding me toward a small gathering near the bar. A distinguished man with a military bearing, a petite woman with a camera around her neck, and 2 elegant ladies engaged in animated conversation. "Everyone, this is Dorothy, crossing an ocean solo for the first time," Margaret announced. "Dorothy, meet the unaccompanied adventurers, Richard, retired Navy, Sophia, wildlife photographer, and sisters Elaine and Patricia, who've been everywhere twice." Warm greetings and handshakes followed, along with immediate invitations to join their table for dinner. Their easy acceptance and lack of probing questions was refreshing after months of being the subject of small-town speculation. "We have a standing policy," Sophia explained as we made our way to the dining room. "No asking why someone travels alone unless they volunteer the information. Everyone has a story, but not everyone wants to tell it." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. Dinner proved delightful. Exquisite Mediterranean cuisine accompanied by flowing conversation about past travels, tomorrow's port of call in Santorini, and gentle advice for a first-time cruiser. Not once did I feel the awkwardness of being the extra person that sometimes plagued me at social gatherings back home. "How are you finding it so far?" Richard asked as we lingered over dessert. "Different from what you expected?" I considered his question thoughtfully. "It's more comfortable than I anticipated. I worried I'd feel conspicuously alone." "Ah, but there's a difference between being alone and being lonely," Elaine observed. "One is a circumstance, the other a state of mind. My late husband and I planned to see the Mediterranean together," I found myself sharing. "Cancer took him before we could. This trip is long overdue." "Harold and I had a similar plan for the Orient Express," Margaret nodded in understanding. "When I finally took that journey 5 years after he died, I felt him beside me the whole way." "The first solo trip is the hardest," Patricia added gently, "but it gets easier and more addictive." After dinner, we migrated to the deck to watch the stars emerge over the Aegean Sea. The night air carried a salt tang that filled my lungs with each breath, invigorating and cleansing. As my new acquaintances pointed out constellations and shared stories of other seas they'd sailed, I felt a subtle shift within myself, a loosening of the rigid self-definition I'd carried for decades. I wasn't just a widow, a mother, a woman who had been falsely accused. I was a traveler, an adventurer, a person with an open future rather than just a complicated past. Later, alone in my cabin, I opened Robert's journal and uncapped my pen. The blank page waited, full of possibility. After a moment's contemplation, I began to write. First day aboard the Celestial Odyssey. I crossed an ocean today. I sat with strangers who became dinner companions. I watched Athens fade into the horizon and felt myself expanding with each nautical mile. Perhaps that's what this journey is truly about. Not just seeing new places, but becoming a newer version of myself. The Dorothy who might have existed all along, if only I'd given her the chance to emerge. As the ship sailed steadily eastward through the night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, rocked by gentle waves and the knowledge that I was exactly where I needed to be. "There it is," Margaret whispered reverently beside me. "Santorini. I stood transfixed at the ship's railing as the volcanic island emerged from the morning mist, a crescent of rugged cliffs topped with the famous white buildings of Fira and Oya. The pictures I'd studied for months hadn't prepared me for the visceral impact of seeing those blue domes and whitewashed walls rising dramatically from the caldera's edge. "It doesn't look real," I murmured, fumbling for my camera. "Wait until we get closer," Sophia advised, her professional photographer's eye already assessing lighting conditions. "The colors intensify, the whites against that specific shade of Aegean blue. There's nothing else like it on Earth." Our small group of unaccompanied adventurers, as Margaret had dubbed us, had gathered for the approach to Santorini. We'd spent the previous day at sea, getting to know each other through shipboard activities, a cooking class with Richard, watercolor painting with the sisters, and yes, sunrise yoga with Margaret that had left my unused muscles protesting. The ship anchored in the deeper waters of the caldera, unable to dock directly at the steep-cliffed island. Small tender boats would ferry us to shore. "Are you doing an organized excursion?" Richard asked as we made our way toward the disembarkation deck. "I've booked the Akrotiri ruins and wine tasting tour," I replied, checking my day bag for essentials: water bottle, sunscreen, hat, and the ship card that served as my identification and payment method on board. "Excellent choice," Elaine approved. "The prehistoric city is fascinating. Their plumbing system was more advanced than some modern countries." As our tender boat approached the shore, anticipation fluttered in my chest. My first foreign port of call, a place I'd only seen in travel magazines and documentaries. The boat docked with a gentle bump, and suddenly I was stepping onto Greek soil, breathing air that carried hints of volcanic minerals, salt, and sun-baked stone. Our tour group assembled near the cable car station. 12 passengers guided by Elena, a young Greek archaeologist whose enthusiasm for her subject was immediately apparent. The bus wound its way along narrow switchback roads, Elena pointing out landmarks and sharing historical context through a microphone. Akrotiri was buried under volcanic ash around 1600 BCE, she explained as we approached the archaeological site. Like Pompeii, but much older. And unlike Pompeii, the residents appear to have evacuated before the eruption. We've found few human remains. The ruins themselves were sheltered beneath a modern roof structure, protecting the delicate excavations from the elements. As we walked through the ancient streets, Elena painted a vivid picture of daily life in this Bronze Age settlement, their advanced architecture, their artistic achievements, their maritime trading network. "Notice the frescoes," she directed our attention to remarkably preserved wall paintings. The colors still visible after almost 4,000 years. I stared at scenes of fishermen, ships, and elegant women adorned with jewelry. People like us, going about their lives, never imagining their homes would become an archaeological treasure trove millennia later. What would future archaeologists make of our lives, our possessions, our daily routines? After Akrotiri came the promised wine tasting at a vineyard perched on the island's volcanic soil. I found myself seated beside a couple from California, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. "Traveling alone?" the wife asked kindly, as we sampled a crisp Assyrtiko white wine. "Yes," I replied, waiting for the customary look of pity that often followed such an admission. Instead, she nodded appreciatively. "Brave. I've always wanted to try solo travel, but never had the courage." "I didn't think I had the courage either," I admitted, watching sunlight play through my wine glass, until circumstances pushed me to find it. "Isn't that always the way?" her husband observed. "Courage finds us when we have no other choice." His words resonated as our tour continued to a clifftop in Oya, where we would watch the famous Santorini sunset. Finding a spot along the stone wall, I gazed out at the vast expanse of sea and sky, the horizon a blurred line where blue met blue. As the sun began its descent, casting golden light across the whitewashed buildings and turning the caldera waters to liquid amber, I experienced a moment of profound clarity. 3 months ago, I'd been a woman humiliated by a false accusation, hurt by my son's hesitation to defend me, retreating into wounded dignity. Now I stood on a Greek island thousands of miles from home, watching one of the world's most celebrated natural spectacles. The accusation hadn't destroyed me. It had propelled me toward this moment of beauty and self-discovery. I pulled out my phone, driven by a sudden impulse to share this realization. Without overthinking, I snapped a photo of the sunset and sent it to Robert with a brief message: Santorini sunset. Thank you for the journal. I'm filling it with wonders. His reply came almost immediately. Despite the time difference, it's beautiful, Mom. Just like you. Enjoy every moment. Back on the ship that evening, I joined the unaccompanied adventurers for dinner, eager to share experiences from our separate explorations of the island. Dorothy's glowing, Patricia observed as I approached their table. The Santorini effect happens to everyone on their first visit. It was magical, I confirmed, sliding into my seat. The history, the views, even the stray cats lounging in doorways like they owned the place. Tomorrow's Mykonos, Sophia reminded us, consulting the itinerary. Completely different vibe, more cosmopolitan, famous for its windmills and Little Venice district. And shopping, Margaret added with a wink. I've budgeted for at least one irresponsible purchase. Richard raised his glass in a toast. To Santorini behind us, Mykonos ahead, and good company along the way. We clinked glasses, and I realized with a start how comfortable I felt with these near strangers. Our shared status as solo travelers created an instant bond, a mutual understanding that transcended differences in background and nationality. Later in my cabin, I opened Robert's journal again, the day's experiences tumbling through my mind in vivid detail. I wrote about the ruins, the wine, the sunset. Then I found myself writing something unexpected. I feel myself changing, like a photograph developing, edges becoming clearer, colors deepening. The woman who boarded this ship in Piraeus is already different from the woman writing these words. Less defined by what happened to her, more by what she's choosing to happen next. Melissa's accusation was devastating at the time. But now, watching the wake churning behind this massive ship, I see how sometimes the most painful disruptions propel us forward into exactly the waters we need to navigate. Setting down my pen, I stepped onto my private veranda. The night air enveloped me, carrying the scent of salt and possibilities. Stars scattered across the sky in patterns unfamiliar to my Midwestern eyes. The ship's engines thrummed steadily beneath my feet, carrying me onward to tomorrow's adventure. For the first time in decades, I felt truly present, not dwelling in the past or anxiously anticipating the future, but fully inhabiting this moment, this night, this remarkable journey I'd given myself permission to take. Dorothy Winters, traveler, observer, woman in progress, stood alone on her veranda, watching the moon's reflection shimmer on the Aegean Sea, and smiled at her own unfolding story. The trick, Sophia explained, adjusting my hands on the camera, is to look beyond the obvious postcard shot. Find the detail that tells the story. The old fisherman mending nets, the cat sleeping in a windowsill, the shadow pattern on a weathered door. We stood in the narrow streets of Mykonos town, its famous windmills visible on the hillside above us. The morning light cast a gentle glow over the iconic white buildings and blue accents, creating the perfect conditions for photography. I'd mentioned at breakfast that I wished I could better capture the essence of these beautiful places. Sophia, the wildlife photographer of our group, had immediately offered a private tutorial during our morning exploration. There, she encouraged, as I focused on an elderly Greek woman arranging fresh flowers in a blue ceramic pot. That moment tells you more about daily life here than any wide shot of the harbor. I pressed the shutter, surprised by the satisfaction I felt at creating an image that went beyond tourist documentation. Under Sophia's guidance, Mykonos transformed from a series of picturesque views into a living, breathing community. Fishermen returning with the morning catch, shopkeepers arranging displays, locals gathering at cafes for their morning coffee. You have a good eye, Sophia complimented as we reviewed the images. You see people, not just places. I spent 40 years watching students as a high school librarian, I explained. You develop a certain awareness of human moments. We rejoined the others at a seaside restaurant in the area known as Little Venice, where buildings perched precariously at the water's edge. Over lunch of fresh grilled fish and Greek salad, our little group exchanged observations about the island. The beaches on the south side are spectacular, Richard reported. Golden sand, clear water. I may have dozed off under an umbrella for an hour or two. The archaeological museum is small but impressive, contributed Elaine. Artifacts dating back to the Mycenaean period. Margaret leaned in conspiratorially. And I made my irresponsible purchase. She opened a small bag to reveal a handcrafted silver bracelet set with local gemstones. Far too expensive. Absolutely worth it. What about you, Dorothy? Patricia asked. What's been your favorite discovery today? I considered the question, thinking beyond the obvious beauty of the island. The doors, I decided. Every door here tells a story. Some freshly painted, others weathered by decades of sun and salt. Each one opening into a life I'll never know, but can imagine. That's rather poetic, Richard observed with approval. You should put that in your journal. The mention of the journal reminded me of Robert. I'd received another text from him that morning, responding to a photo I'd sent of the Mykonos windmills. These pictures are amazing, Mom. You look happier in each one. We're all following your journey like a serialized novel. Even Melissa asks for updates. The reference to Melissa had surprised me. Despite our conversation before my departure, I hadn't expected her continued interest in my trip. Perhaps she genuinely cared about my experience, or perhaps she was simply trying to maintain a connection through Robert. Either way, I found I didn't mind. After lunch, I separated from the group for some solo exploration. Following Sophia's advice about seeking authentic moments, I wandered away from the main tourist areas into residential neighborhoods where laundry fluttered from balconies and children played in small courtyards. In a tiny square dominated by an ancient olive tree, I discovered a bench in dappled shade, perfect for resting my feet and observing local life. Across from me, an open doorway revealed a workshop where an older man bent over a piece of wood, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. A woodworker, like James had been in his spare time. The unexpected parallel sent a pang through my chest. Not the sharp grief of recent loss, but a gentler ache of remembrance. James would have loved this place, would have wanted to examine the craftsman's tools, discuss techniques across the language barrier. Calimera, the man called, noticing my interest. Good day. Calimera, I replied, one of the few Greek phrases I'd mastered. He gestured for me to approach, pointing proudly to the object taking shape beneath his hands. A small boat, intricately detailed. With animated gestures and the few English words he knew, he explained it was a traditional fishing kayak, the kind his grandfather had used. I nodded understanding, pointing to different elements of the design and watching his face light up at my appreciation. When he mimed taking a photograph, I realized he was inviting me to document his work. Through my camera's viewfinder, I captured his gnarled hands against the smooth wood, the concentration in his eyes, the pride in his craftsmanship, a universal language of creation that transcended the barriers between us. When I showed him the images on my camera's screen, he nodded approval, then unexpectedly pressed a small wooden object into my hand, a simply carved dolphin, polished smooth by sandpaper and oil. Gift, he said in heavily accented English. Remember Mykonos. Touched by this unexpected connection, I fumbled in my bag and pulled out the small notebook I carried for jotting down observation. Tearing out a page, I quickly sketched the man's workshop, adding details of the tools hanging on the wall and the half-finished boat on his workbench. I signed it with my name and Librarian from America before offering it to him. His delight at this exchange was evident. He carefully placed my drawing in a worn leather folder, then insisted on walking me back to the main square, pointing out local landmarks along the way that tourists rarely noticed. As we parted with mutual waves and smiles, I realized I'd experienced something beyond tourism, a genuine human connection across culture and language. The wooden dolphin in my pocket represented not just a souvenir, but a reminder that authentic moments were possible even in the most visited destinations. Back on the ship that evening, I joined the group for our now customary dinner together. As we shared the day's experiences, I found myself recounting the woodcarver story with unexpected animation. That's what travel is really about, Margaret nodded approvingly. Not just seeing places, but connecting with people whose lives are so different from our own. It makes the world simultaneously larger and smaller, Richard observed. Larger because you realize how much diversity exists. Smaller because you recognize our common humanity. The Dorothy who arrived in Athens would never have wandered into that residential area alone, Sophia noted with a perceptive smile. You're becoming quite the intrepid explorer. Her comment startled me. Was I truly changing that noticeably? I considered how easily I now navigated the ship, how confidently I explored each port, how naturally I engaged with strangers. The contrast with my cautious, routine-bound life at home was striking. Later, alone in my cabin, I examined the wooden dolphin, its smooth curves fitting perfectly in my palm. Such a small object to represent such a significant shift in perspective. In Robert's journal, I wrote, "I've spent decades defining myself through my relationships to others. James's wife, Robert's mother, the wrongly accused woman seeking vindication. Here, thousands of miles from home, I'm discovering a self that exists independently of those definitions. A woman who converses with strangers, who ventures down unknown streets, who exchanges art with Greek woodcarvers. The Mediterranean isn't just showing me new places. It's revealing a version of myself I never knew existed, or perhaps forgot was possible. A Dorothy who isn't confined by other people's perceptions or even her own limiting beliefs about what a widow in her 60s should be doing. I wonder if this is what James always saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. This capacity for joy, for adventure, for genuine connection with the world around me. I placed the wooden dolphin on my bedside table next to James's photograph, a juxtaposition of past and present that felt right rather than contradictory. My husband would have understood this journey, would have encouraged it even if he couldn't share it physically. As the ship sailed through the night toward our next destination, I realized that the greatest discovery of this trip wasn't any ancient ruin or breathtaking vista. It was the excavation of my own buried potential, hidden beneath years of caution and compromise, now emerging into Mediterranean light. The Rome airport bustled with activity as I waited in the departure lounge, my carry-on bag at my feet, and a small shopping bag of Italian gifts on my lap. 2 weeks had transformed me in ways I was still processing. A Mediterranean tan warming my normally pale complexion, newfound confidence in my bearing, and memories that would sustain me through the coming Midwest winter. "Don't be a stranger, Dorothy," Margaret said, embracing me warmly. My Australian friend's flight departed an hour after mine, giving us time for a final coffee together. "Remember, you promised to consider New Zealand next year." "I haven't forgotten," I assured her. "Though I might need to recover from this adventure first." She gave me an appraising look. "You know what I've observed about you these past 2 weeks? You've stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world." "What do you mean?" "When we first met, you had this way of qualifying everything. I'm just a retired librarian. This is only my first trip abroad. As if you needed to explain why you deserve to be experiencing these things." She squeezed my hand. "Now you simply engage with each moment fully, without justification." Her observation resonated with unexpected clarity. She was right. I had arrived in Greece almost apologetic about my presence, as if someone might question my right to embark on such a journey alone. Now, after swimming in the blue waters of Crete, haggling in the markets of Rhodes, walking the ancient streets of Ephesus and Pompeii, I moved through the world with certainty of purpose. "The cruise was wonderful," I told Margaret, "but I'm most proud of these past 3 days navigating Rome on my own." I'd extended my trip with a brief solo stay in the Eternal City, arranging my own hotel, planning my own itinerary, finding my way through the labyrinthine streets with nothing but a pocket map and rudimentary Italian phrases. The Dorothy of 4 months ago would never have considered such an independent venture. My flight was called for boarding. Margaret and I embraced once more, exchanging promises to keep in touch, promises I knew we would keep. The unaccompanied adventurers had created a group chat for sharing photos and updates, already planning potential reunions on future cruises. "Safe travels, my friend," Margaret said. "Remember, this is just the beginning." The flight home offered hours for reflection. I reviewed the journey through the pages of Robert's journal, now filled with my observations, sketches, and ephemera, a pressed flower from Santorini, a ticket stub from the Vatican museums, a napkin from a cafe in Sicily with the recipe for perfect cannoli scrawled in the chef's handwriting. On the final blank page, I wrote, "The woman returning to Oakwood is both the same and entirely different from the one who departed." I've carried my history with me. James's memory, Robert's complicated love, even the echoes of Melissa's accusation that set this journey in motion. But these elements no longer define me completely. I've discovered a Dorothy who can stand alone at the railing of a ship, navigate foreign cities, make friends across cultures and generations. A Dorothy who takes photographs that capture essence rather than just appearance, who exchanges art with Greek craftsmen, who savors wine and sunset without needing to share the experience to validate it. Perhaps this is the greatest gift of travel, not the sights we see, but the self we discover in unfamiliar surroundings, the person we might always have been if circumstances had unfolded differently. I return neither bitter about the past nor anxious about the future, but centered in a present of my own making. The airport arrival hall in Chicago felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. As I cleared customs and headed toward the domestic terminal for my connecting flight, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. A text from Robert. Landed safely in Chicago? Let me know when to expect you in Oakwood. I replied with my updated arrival time, then continued toward my gate. The final leg of the journey passed quickly, and soon the familiar landscape of the Midwest appeared below. Patchwork farmland, winding rivers, the small cluster of buildings that comprised downtown Oakwood. As the plane touched down, I felt a momentary trepidation. Would the growth I'd experienced survive transplantation back into familiar soil? Or would old patterns reassert themselves, erasing the woman who had emerged along Mediterranean shores? The worry dissipated when I entered the arrival area and saw not just Robert waiting, but a small gathering. Marion with a welcome home banner, Thomas Adler and his wife, even Officer Davis and several of my bridge club friends. "Welcome home, world traveler," Marion called, rushing forward to embrace me. Robert approached more cautiously, his eyes taking in my changed appearance. "Mom," he said softly, "you look incredible." "I feel incredible," I replied truthfully, accepting his careful hug. "We've been following your adventure through your texts and photos," Thomas explained. "Quite the celebrity in town now, Dorothy Winters, international explorer." The small crowd escorted me to baggage claim, asking questions about the cruise, exclaiming over my tan, complimenting my new confidence. Robert walked slightly apart, watching the interaction with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't until we were in his car heading toward my house that he spoke his mind. "You're different," he observed quietly. "Not just how you look, but everything about you." "Is that bad?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "It's wonderful, just I feel like I'm meeting a new version of my mother." "Not new," I corrected gently, "just uncovered. Like those ruins in Ephesus, always there beneath the surface, waiting for someone to dust away the accumulated years and reveal what was hidden." He nodded, navigating the familiar streets of our small town. "I've been thinking a lot while you were gone, about what happened with Melissa's accusation, about how I responded, or didn't respond. And I realized something important. My hesitation wasn't really about doubting you. It was about my own inability to stand firm in conflict." He glanced at me briefly. "I've been working on that in therapy, learning to trust my own judgment even when those around me are pushing in another direction." I considered his words. "That's good, Robert. Important growth." "Melissa and I have been talking again," he added cautiously. "Not about getting back together. We both still think postponing the wedding was the right decision, but about friendship, about healing from what happened." "I'm glad," I said, surprising myself with the genuine feeling behind the words. We pulled into my driveway, the modest house looking exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow different, smaller perhaps, or simply less defining of who I was. "I had Marion stock your refrigerator yesterday," Robert said, carrying my suitcase to the door, "and there are fresh flowers inside from the garden club." "Thank you," I said, fitting my key into the lock, "for the welcome home, for understanding I needed space, for the journal." He smiled, a flash of the boy he had been visible in the man's face. "I'm learning from you, Mom, about respecting boundaries, about supporting without smothering." He set my suitcase in the entryway. "Will you tell me more about your trip sometime? The real stories, not just the highlights?" "I'd like that," I agreed. "Perhaps dinner next week? I could make that pasta dish I learned in Sicily." Alone in my house after Robert left, I moved from room to room, reacquainting myself with the space that had been mine for decades. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, yet I viewed it all through new eyes. Eyes that had seen the Acropolis at sunrise, the blue domes of Santorini, the ancient streets of Pompeii. On the mantel, family photographs chronicled the years. James and me on our wedding day, Robert's graduation, various Christmases and birthdays. I studied them with fresh perspective, seeing not just documentation of the past, but a visual narrative of a life still unfolding. From my purse, I removed the wooden dolphin the Greek craftsman had given me and placed it beside the photographs, a symbol of the journey taken, the connections made, the Dorothy discovered. Then I unpacked my suitcase, hanging new clothes beside old ones, creating a closet that represented both who I had been and who I was becoming. Not a replacement, but an integration. Not an erasing of the past, but an expansion of possibility. The Mediterranean cruise, born from hurt, indignation, and a desire to reclaim my life after false accusation, had become something far more profound than mere vacation or even revenge. It had become a rebirth. Dorothy Winters had returned to Oakwood, transformed, awakened, and quietly certain that her greatest adventures were still to come.